Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Okay, it is required to measure the frictional power. So, why it is required to measure a frictional power? Because if you look at a nicely designed engine and a bad engine, the main difference in them is going to be how much are the frictional losses. So, obviously a good engine design will have very little amount of energy being lost as frictional loss, and a bad design will have lot of energy being lost as a frictional loss. That is one of the main difference between a good engine and a bad engine. There could be several other aspects which can be used to define good engine and bad engine, but this is one of the ways to define or to figure out whether engine is a good engine or a bad engine. So, ultimately you have energy which is used in overcoming the friction. So, ultimately it gets converted to heat. Now, that heat goes into the engine structure, okay, and that needs to be removed, because if you do not remove, then what will happen? The heat accumulation will take place, temperatures will rise and it will lead to failure. So, in order to avoid it, finally the heat has to be dissipated by the cooling system, as they appear in the form of frictional heat and they influence the required cooling capacity. So, if the frictional losses are more, that means your cooling system has to be larger, because it is required to dissipate that amount of heat as well. Okay. So, lower friction means availability of more brake power, and this also means that the brake specific fuel consumption will be lower. Your vehicle will give better mileage, superior mileage. The BSFC increases with increasing engine speed, and at some speed it renders the uses of the engine prohibitive. So, if you are having very high frictional power, the BSFC will go up, you will consume more and more amount of fuel for getting the desired work output, and if the frictional horsepower keeps on increasing, at some point you will have no useful power coming out, or it will be very, very expensive in terms of the money that you spend on the fuel. So, therefore, the level of friction determines what is the maximum power output which can be obtained economically. So, you have to understand that the friction, it affects the specific fuel consumption, and it determines whether the power that you are generating is economical or not. Okay. Now, question is, how do you measure? So, measurement of friction power gives an insight into the methods by which the output of the engine can be increased. So, if you are doing the measurement, you can actually specifically figure out which interface is contributing to how much friction. So, that will tell you that, okay, if you improve this aspect and reduce friction, you can also increase the power output from the engine, you can also make the power generation more economical. Okay. So, in order to do that, in the evaluation of indicated power and mechanical efficiency, measured friction power is also used. Okay. So, frictional power of an engine can be determined by several methods, and some of these methods are written here. So, the first method to determine the frictional horsepower is called Valence line test or Valence line method. The second test is called the Morse test, and the third test is called the motoring test, and the fourth test is that you separately measure the indicated power and the brake power and subtract one from the other. Okay. So, these are the four methods. We will discuss the pros and cons of each of these methods and see how convenient or how difficult they are. So, let us look at the first method, which is the Valence line method. Okay. So, in this method, the gross fuel consumption versus brake power at a constant speed is plotted. So, please understand what you are doing. Here you have the torque, okay, torque output, and here you have specific fuel consumption on the y axis. Okay. So, you are going to plot this. So, you take a certain speed, you maintain cooling water temperature. So, these two you maintain. So, obviously, when you generate too much of torque, your fuel consumption will be excessively high, right. As you keep on reducing the torque, it reduces and then it becomes almost linear. Okay. So, when you come to 0 torque, that means now you are not producing any useful power output, but still you are consuming some work. What it is used for? It is used to overcome the friction. So, what you do in this test is, this is almost linear, the later part of the curve is linear. So, if you extend this, so wherever it intersects the x axis, so that means this much is the frictional torque, and this frictional torque will remain constant because your engine is constant. So, all the time at all speeds this will be more or less constant. Okay. So, this is a very simple method, you just have to run the engine, start the engine, keep the engine speed fixed, then vary the torque from high torque to 0. Okay. So, all you will have many data points here and you can only come up to here and then extrapolate it to intersect the x axis. So, the point where this graph cuts the brake power axis is an indication of frictional power of the engine at that particular speed. Obviously, if you change the speed, this curve will be changing, right. So, the negative work, this is the negative work. So, what it really means is that when the engine is doing this kind of a negative work, the fuel consumption is 0, right. So, the negative work represents the combined losses due to mechanical friction, pumping and blow-by. This test is applicable only to compression ignition engines. Okay. Now, you see the main drawback of this method is the long distance to be extrapolated from the data measured between 5 to 14% load towards the 0 line of the fuel input. See here. So, this is very large interpolation. Now, what happens is, in practical situation, you see you will have some data points, one point will be here, other point will be here, and these are all experimental points. So, that means these are having some experimental error, right, and then you make a judgment and join them. Now, if you join such that, you know, if you take a lower line, you may cut here, if you take a little longer line, it may cut here. So, if you do not do extrapolation with care with these experimental data points, you may end up in getting the very large error. So, this is one of the flip side of this method. Okay. So, the directional margin of error is rather wide because of the graph, which may not be a straight line at times. So, many times, you know, the engine experimental data point may not fall on the same line, they may be slightly above or slightly lower. Depending on what is the slope, you will intersect, that intersect could be small or large. So, you may make an error. The changing slope along the curve indicate part efficiencies of increment of fuel. The pronounced change in the slope in this line near full load reflects the limiting influence of the air fuel ratio and the quality of combustion. When you take the engine to full load or overload condition, obviously you will have very high fuel consumption as well. Similarly, there is a slight curvature at light load, this is perhaps due to difficulty in injecting accurately and consistently very small quantity of fuel per cycle. So, if you see that this is not perfectly straight line, this could be because at low loads you are injecting very small quantity, and it is with mechanical injectors or with even with electronic injectors, it is very difficult to inject the same quantity in each cycle. There will always be some variations, and because of that variations you will not get points in a straight line. There may be either up or low. If you put more fuel, they may be generating more torque. If you put a little less fuel, you may be generating little less torque. Okay. Please understand, when I am talking of this fuel quantity, how much fuel quantity are we talking about? So, this fuel quantity that we are injecting could be anything between 1-2 milligram to 5-10-20 milligram in each injection, and that has to be controlled. 5-10 milligram is nothing, it is 1 millimeter cube, right. So, it is very small quantity, and putting that at very fast speeds could be extremely challenging. Okay. So, it is essential that great care is taken at light loads to establish the true nature of the curve. The valence line for a swivel chamber CI engine is straighter than that for direct injection engine. So, swivel chamber, it is rather more better method, more accurate method, but for DI engines, since the accuracy of injection is not that great, okay, there may be a little bit difficulty in accurate results. The accuracy obtained in method is reasonably good and compares favorably with other methods if extrapolation is done extremely carefully. So, what you need to do is you need to make several measurements at each data point, and then you have to put the data point with error bars and then try to do it very carefully. Okay. The second test is called Morse test. What is this Morse test? So, please understand, Morse test is applicable only to multi-cylinder engines, whereas Valence line test you could do it to single cylinder or multi-cylinder, it does not matter. Okay. So, in this test the engine is first run at the required speed and the output is measured. So, first you fire all the cylinders at a certain speed, and then you measure how much is the torque output, how much is the power being generated, and then what you do, if it is a petrol engine, you just take out the lead from one of the spark plugs, right. So, when you take out the lead from one of the spark plugs, now what will happen? All four and then you maintain the engine speed at the same level. So, that means all four fuels all four cylinders are operating at the same speed. So, frictional horsepower is same, but the indicated power is being generated by only 3 cylinders in this case, and brake power is also being contributed only by these 3 cylinders. Okay. So, in the first case you have 4 cylinders which are contributing to indicated power, to the brake power, and frictional horsepower is something which is fixed. In the second case you have the same frictional horsepower of all 4 cylinders, because the 4th cylinder is also on the same crankshaft. So, it is rotating at the same speed. So, basically one cylinder is cut out, but short circuiting the spark plug. If it is SI engine, you will short circuit or take out the lead, or if it is diesel engine, you take out the injector pipe. Okay. You disconnect the injector. So, if the injector is not injecting, obviously it will not be contributing towards the indicated power. Under these conditions, all the cylinders, all other cylinders motor the cutout cylinder. So, if it is a 6 cylinder engine, 5 are working, 5 are firing, 6th is just being motored, right. So, the output is measured by keeping the engine the speed constant at the original value. Okay. So, the difference in the output is a measure of the indicated horsepower of the cutout cylinder. Okay. Difference in the output is a measure of indicated horsepower of the cutout cylinder. So, thus for each cylinder the IP is obtained and added together to find the total IP of the engine. I will explain. So, suppose 4 cylinders are there and all of them are firing. So, IP of 4 will be equal to BP of 4 plus FP of 4, right. Now, what you do, you take the first cylinder out. When you take the first cylinder out, now the power is being produced by cylinder number 2, 3 and 4. Okay. So, IP of 3 will be equal to BP of 3 plus FP of 4. Okay. So, now when you subtract these two, what will happen? BP will cancel out and you will know what is the IP being generated by the 4th cylinder. Okay. So, as the engine is running at the same speed, it is quite reasonable to assume that FP remains constant. From the above equation, we see that IP of the nth cylinder, first cylinder we cut out. So, IP of the first cylinder will be equal to BP of the n cylinders, 4 cylinders minus BP of the 3 cylinders. So, this is giving me IP of the first cylinder, right. Then what I do, I connect the first cylinder, I take out the second cylinder. Using this, I again figure out what is the IP being produced by the second cylinder. Then I take out the third cylinder and I take out the 4th cylinder. So, I individually now know how much is the IP being generated by the first cylinder, second cylinder, third cylinder and 4th cylinder. So, IP of the 4 cylinders is now summation of these 4, I will just add them, okay. And BP of the n cylinder is what I am measuring. So, when I subtract this from here, I will know what is the FP of 4 cylinders, okay. So, by subtracting BP n from IP n, FP of the engine can be, entire engine can be obtained or 4 cylinders can be obtained. Is this clear? This method gives reasonably accurate result, but is liable to errors due to changes in mixture distribution and other conditions by cutting out one cylinder. So, when you cut out one cylinder, the mixture distribution will change. So, that may give rise to some errors. So, in gasoline engines where there is common manifold for 2 or more cylinders, the mixture distribution as well as the volumetric efficiency both may change, that may also give rise to some errors. So, almost all engines have a common exhaust manifold for all cylinders, and cutting out one of the cylinders may greatly affect the pulsations in the exhaust system. So, instead of 4 engines, now only 3 are emitting the exhaust. So, it will affect the pulsations, which may significantly change the engine performance by imposing slightly different back pressure. So, back pressure that is being created on the engine may slightly change, and that may also give rise to some errors. So, these are some of the sources of error when you are going to use Morse test. Okay. Third test, as I discussed, is motoring test. Okay. So, motoring test, in the motoring test, engine is first run to the desired speed by its own power, okay, and allowed to remain at the given speed and load conditions for some time. So, suppose you want to measure the frictional power 2000 rpm, 50% load. So, you run the engine and let it remain there for some time, so that all the temperatures, fuel temperature, oil temperature, coolant temperature, everything is in thermally stable conditions. So, let those thermally stable conditions be achieved, and then the power of the engine during this period is absorbed by a transient dynamometer, swinging field transient dynamometer. I told you AC dynamometer. AC dynamometer, you know what was the beauty of that dynamometer? That you can motor it whenever you want, and you can use the same as generator. So, now when the engine is operating, this guy is going to operate as generator. It is going to act as a generator and generate electricity. Once we switch off the engine, then what will happen? It will start acting as motor, and these are highly efficient motors. AC motors are highly efficient with a efficiency of the range of 95-98%, okay, and you already know how much is the efficiency. So, the fuel is then cut off. So, once the thermally stable conditions of the engine under firing conditions are obtained, then what you do? You cut off the fuel supply. When you cut off the fuel supply, what will happen? Engine will stop, but you do not allow the engine to stop, you keep on motoring, but this time using the dynamometer, using the AC motor in the dynamometer. So, the dynamometer is converted to run as a motor for motoring the engine at the same speed at which it was previously running. So, suppose 2000 rpm you are operating as engine, now motor you will do the motoring up to 2000 rpm, okay, and what will happen? You have to make sure that the coolant water supply should be cut off. You do not want the temperatures to fall. So, the power supply to the motor is then measured, and where this power which is being generated by the motor is going to only overcome the friction, and we know how much electricity we are putting, we know what is the efficiency of the motor at that speed. So, using that we can figure out how much is the frictional power, okay. So, the power supply to the motor is measured, which is a measure of the frictional power of the engine. During the motoring test, the water supply is cut off, water supply to the cooling system is cut off, because if you do not cut, no heat is being generated in the engine and coolant is on. So, temperatures will drop quickly, and if the temperature drops quickly, the lubricating oil viscosity will change, which will change the frictional horsepower. So, in order to reduce that effect, what you do? You cut off the supply, so that the temperatures are maintained, okay. So, temperatures are maintained close to actual operating conditions of the engine, okay. This method though determines the frictional power at temperature conditions very close to the actual operating conditions at test speeds and loads, but it does not give true losses occurring under firing conditions. It is close, but it is still not at the same level as in a firing engine because of these reasons. These are the listed reasons. First is that the temperatures in the motored engine are different from those in a firing engine. Okay, in a firing engine you will have peak temperatures which are extremely high. In a motored engine, since there is no combustion taking place, at the piston ring interface, the temperatures will still be relatively lower. So, even if the water circulation is stopped, the incoming air also cools the cylinder. So, air is coming in, air is at room temperature, no heat is being generated. So, even that is going to contribute to cooling of the engine. This reduces the lubricating oil temperature and increases the friction due to increase in oil viscosity. So, when the temperature falls, viscosity increases is going to increase the friction. This problem is much more severe in air cooled engines, okay, because air cooled, you have fins and you can't stop the air cooling. You can stop the liquid cooling, okay, by stopping the pump, but here you cannot stop. So, this pressure on the bearings and piston rings is also lower than the firing pressure. So, when the combustion takes place, I told you that in the top combustion chamber pressure could be anything like 70, 80, 100 bar or up to 200 bar in some modern engines. So, that contributes to very high loads on the bearings, which affects the friction in the bearings. But here when you are motoring, there is no pressure being generated in the combustion chamber. So, friction will be lower. Okay, so, the pressure in the bearing and piston rings is much lower than the firing pressure. So, load on the main and connecting rod bearings is also lower. Okay. The clearance between piston and cylinder wall is more due to cooling. This reduces the piston friction. Okay. The air is drawn at a temperature which is less than when it is firing, because it does not get heat from the cylinder. So, air when comes in, all the manifolds etc. get heated up because of the heat you are generating in the combustion chamber. When there is only motoring, no heat is being generated. So, the air that is coming in also will be at relatively lower temperature. So, you will lose heat from the cylinder rather than heating the air. Okay. So, all these factors also contribute to slightly different results than what it is in actual practice. Okay. So, you will get relatively lower frictional power measurement using even motoring test, but this is a good test. The best test is the measurement of indicated and brake power. So, you measure the indicated power separately, you measure the brake power separately. That is one of the best ways to do it. It is the ideal and the most accurate method of measuring the frictional power. So, frictional power is obtained by computing the difference between the indicated power obtained from the indicator diagram and brake power obtained by the dynamometer. Brake power is what is available at the shaft end. How do you measure? By dynamometer, right. Indicated power, how do you measure? By putting indicating mechanism which can plot a PV cycle, right. And when you plot using indicator diagram, when you make a PV slot, there is a actual diagram we studied, right. So, in that there is a positive loop and there is a negative loop, and we subtract positive the negative loop from the positive, you get the net power output or net indicated power output. So, this method requires an elaborate experimental setup to obtain accurate indicator diagrams at high speeds. Okay. So, this is easier said than done. When you do it, it is very expensive, and also you need very complex and costly experimental setup, which is used only in research laboratories. So, if your research laboratory is not really sophisticated enough, you will not be able to do it. Let us see how we do it. There is another test called retardation test. This test involves retarding the engine by cutting the fuel supply. So, engine is made to run at no load and rated speed. So, you are operating here no load at rated speed, taking into account all usual precautions. When the engine is running under steady operating conditions, the fuel supply is cut off. So, when you cut off the fuel supply, the speed and torque, there is no torque actually. So, the speed will fall with time. So, you measure the speed, what is the speed and time. Suppose the engine is operating at 5000 RPM. So, you as soon as you cut off, you start taking readings, okay, how much time it takes to get down to 4000, how much time it takes to get down to 3000, 2000, 1000 and 0. So, here you have the time and here you have the RPM. Okay. So, you get this straight line. Okay. So, when the engine is running under steady operating condition, the fuel supply is cut off simultaneously. The time for fall in the speed by say 20, 40, 60, 80% and rated speed is recorded, and you get this. Okay. Same test is again repeated at another load, 50% load of the engine. You take it to some rated speed, okay, and then you switch off the fuel supply. Again you will get this, a graph of time for fall in the speed on the x-axis and speed on the y-axis at no load condition is drawn. Similarly, you draw it for 50%. From the graph, the time required to fall through the same range. So, what you do is, once you have these, you want to figure out that, okay, if my speed is falling by 100 RPM, how much time does it take? So, if you look at this at no load condition, you have this large time because it is a no load. At high load condition 50%, 100 RPM speed, this is the T3. Okay. So, from the graph, the time required to fall through the same range in both no load and 50% load condition is is actually evaluated, and then using a formula you can figure out what is the frictional torque and frictional power required. So then there is a formula to actually calculate once you have this speed and how much time it takes to for the drop in that speed by that range, you can put it in a formula to get the frictional power. Okay. So if you compare all these methods that we have discussed, so valence line test and Morse tests are very cheap and easy to conduct. Okay. But both of these tests give only an overall idea of the losses. Okay. Whereas motoring test gives a very good insight into various causes of the loss and is a very powerful tool. In fact, I forgot to mention here, in the motoring test what you can also do is you can actually figure out how much each of the accessory is contributing. Say for example, if you want to figure out how much your lubricating oil pump is contributing. So what you can do is you can have the engine do the motoring, see how much power is going in, and then you take out the lubricating oil pump and then again do the measurement. The difference of these two powers will tell you how much that small pump is contributing. Okay. If you want to test different rings of different ring tension, then you can figure out. So none of these tests, valence line or Morse test, can give you component wise distribution, how much each component is contributing. Suppose you want to figure out how much valves are contributing. So you disable the valves, okay, and do the test and subtract from the all full engine testing. So you will know how much the valve and valve seat is contributing to the friction. So that way you can calculate. So this gives you this is a very good test. This gives you insights into various causes of the losses. All that frictional loss, which part, which component, which interface is contributing to how much frictional loss, that you can figure out using motoring test, and it is a very powerful tool. As far as accuracy is concerned, IP minus BP, indicated power minus brake power method, is the most accurate if carefully done. So you physically measure how much is the indicated power, physically measure how much is the brake power, this is the most accurate method. Motoring method usually gives a higher value of frictional power compared to valence line method, because you are not operating at actual temperature conditions, your temperatures, in spite of your best precautions, they come down. So it gives you more frictional power. Retardation method, although simple, requires accurate determination of load torque and the time for the fall in the speed in the same range. Okay. So indicated power of an engine tells us about the health of the engine. For example, if you want to figure out how much is what is the condition of my piston rings, whether it is new or whether it is old. So what you can do is you can take an engine which is new, okay. So ring tension will be more, ring gaps will be less, so frictional power will be relatively high. When the engine wears out, what will happen? The piston rings will wear out, liner will wear out, there is a honing mark on the liners, those will wear out. So then the friction will reduce, and therefore the frictional losses will also reduce, but it is not good. In this case it is not good, because it is going to contribute to other issues, and you can figure out actually by doing the testing of the motoring test, you will be able to figure out what is the condition of the rings, what is the condition of the liner without opening the engine. So this also gives an indication regarding the conversion of chemical energy into fuel, chemical energy in the fuel to the heat energy. Indicated power is an important variable because it is the potential output of the engine. Indicated power means whatever heat you are putting in, whatever energy you are putting in, all of that is getting converted into heat. So indicated power tells you what is the maximum power that you can theoretically generate, provided your frictional losses are 0. So it gives you how much is maximum possible. It sets up the highest level to be achieved, and then using the optimization of the engine components, you try to reach as much closer to that level as possible. So the measurement of indicated power must be more accurate than motoring and other indirect methods of measuring the frictional power. So there are two methods of finding the indicated power. Okay. One is that by taking the indicator diagram with the help of a suitable engine indicator. So indicator diagram is a mechanical device, okay, and by measuring the BP minus FP separately and adding the two. So let us talk about the indicator diagram method. So indicator diagram method, The device which measures the variation in the cylinder pressure over a part or full cycle is called an indicator, okay, and plot of such information is called indicator diagram. So, basically it is nothing but a PV diagram. Using a suitable linkages, you are making a PV diagram. Indicator diagram is an intermediate record available in the account of total energy liberated by the fuel before it is measured at the output shaft. It is an indicator of process of converting heat into mechanical work, and it gives an insight into combustion phenomena, how efficiently you are burning the fuel, okay, and other factors such as rate of pressure rise, ignition delay, etc. There are two basic types. One is the PV plot, mostly it is mechanical indicator mechanism, and then P theta plot, which is mostly electronic indicator mechanism. So, both of these indicators are mutually convertible. That means, if you have a PV diagram, you can do the calculation and convert it to P theta diagram, or if you have a P theta diagram, using calculations you can convert to PV diagram, both are possible. So, if you look at the indicator diagram, this is the PV diagram. Here you have volume on the x axis, and here you have the pressure on the y axis, and we know this is the PV diagram, okay. So, this is positive loop and this is the negative loop, okay. So, if you have a successful combustion, this is how the PV diagram is going to look like, and if you have a misfire event, that means your for some reason the spark is not able to ignite, then you have a this kind of a event, okay. And here you can see, here this is positive, this is negative, but in a missed cycle or missed spark, both these will be negative, right, because you are not generating any power output. So, during a missed cycle of operation, there is no power developed, and therefore, the entire area is shaded. Here it is only, this is shaded area is basically negative. The unshaded area represents the gross power. So, this is the gross power being produced, and the shaded area represents the pumping power. So, gross power minus pumping power is the indicated power, okay. So, you can actually put it on the indicator diagram, indicator mechanism on the engine cylinder head, and then you can plot it, okay. The second method is to basically do it electronically, which requires a pressure sensing device, a device for sensing the piston displacement, because you should know where the piston is in the cylinder in the whole stroke, and angular position of the piston over the complete engine cycle, and then you need some display device which can predict both pressure and piston displacement on a set of paper. So, if you can use it mechanically, so plotter kind of a thing plots the PV diagram, or you can do it electronically. Main types of indicators are piston indicators, balanced diaphragm type indicator, and electronic indicators. So, these are basically the two mechanical types, and this one is more electronic type. So, in addition to this, optical encoders indicators are also used. There is a large number of indicators are in use. Of the above type, these were used quite long back. Nowadays, mostly only electronic indicators are used. So, this is basically just of academic interest. Currently, not many people might be using, at least I have not seen people using the mechanical systems. It is electronic indicators which are most commonly used at present. So, in the electronic indicators, in order to investigate individual cycles or part of the cycle, electronic indicators have been developed. Basically, there are 4 parts of electronic indicator system. One is that you should have a pressure pickup. So, some kind of a sensor which can sense very accurately the cylinder pressure, and then a pre-amplifying device, because whenever you are doing a pressure sensing device, for example, if you are using a piezoelectric pressure transducer, which is the most common type of pressure transducer used, it has a very wide range, and when the pressure is applied, there is a piezoelectric crystal of quartz or some material which when applied pressure it gives you charge signal. But this charge is very small, it is picocoulombs, very small charge. When you want to acquire that charge, it will not make any sense, you can't acquire it really, because the only language that your data acquisition system understands is the language of voltage. So, you need some intermediate device which can convert this very small charge into proportional voltage and then amplify that voltage to 0 to 5 volt, right. So, this device is called pre-amplifying device. So, basically it is called charge amplifier, charge amplifier. So, you have charge as input and then it is converted into voltage and then voltage is then amplified to the required range that your data acquisition system can acquire. And then you need time based recording device, which is just nothing but data acquisition system, which is going to record the whole thing, and then you need a display unit. I will not go into details, those of you who are interested we can show you in the lab, but this is just a typical diagram for a piezoelectric pressure transducer. It is shown quite big, but in reality this is like this big, that is all. So, this end there is a very flexible diaphragm, very sensitive diaphragm, very thin metallic diaphragm. So, pressure, when the pressure is applied on it, this will deform, and then here you have some electrodes, and in between these two electrodes you have quartz crystals. So, there is basically cascading of crystals and electrodes. So, when the pressure is applied on this end, crystals will be crushed, crystals will be pressurized, and when those crystals will be pressurized, charge will be generated. The function of the electrode is to collect that charge, and then through some mechanism it comes here to the lead, okay, and then there are some nuts and bolts how you have to tighten and all that. So, it generates an electrical signal, charge signal in proportional to the pressure which it is subjected to. So, if you have high pressure, high charge signal will be generated. If you have low pressure, very weak signal will be generated. This is anyway very weak. So, the transducer is usually fitted in the cylinder head just like a spark plug without projecting into combustion space. So, we use this terminology quite frequently. We say it is mounted in the cylinder flush with the cylinder head. So, flush with the cylinder head means, see, suppose this is my cylinder head. So, when I have to apply the pressure transducer, it should not project out like this. Spark plug is projected out like this, but here this is really at the same level as cylinder head, right. So, this is called mounted flush. So, that means the gases, it should not create any obstruction, it should be very smooth surface on this side, okay. So, this pressure is picked up with respect to the displacement of the diaphragm, and then the displacement of the diaphragm is transmitted to the transducer element, which may be piezoelectric, which is most common. So, I think I have shown you this this is piezoelectric quartz crystal, but instead of that you can have electromagnetic, you can have capacitance type, you can have a whole Wheatstone bridge. Here instead of this you can have a small Wheatstone bridge. So, strain gauge based elements is also possible. So, the data obtained from pressure transducer is clubbed with data from the speed sensor or the shaft sensor, which will tell you what is the position of the piston in the stroke, and the two of them are synchronized. So, at what crank angle degree what is the pressure. So, here you can then plot P theta diagram, okay. So, this is the pressure and this is the theta crank angle, this is the TDC position and this is the pressure crank angle diagram that you get. You can convert this pressure crank angle diagram into PV diagram if you wish so, and this can then be used. You can apply the first law of thermodynamics and you can convert it into different things. You can figure out what is the rate of heat release, you can figure out what is the rate of pressure rise, you can figure out when is the combustion starting, you can figure out when is the combustion ending, what is the combustion duration, whether the engine is a knocking combustion or not. So, all these things can be figured out from this diagram, okay. So, with that we come to the end of this particular lecture.